Hello everyone, this training session will cover the component definition window. This screen is used to define payroll and leave-related components, including basic salary, allowances, deductions, or leave types, all based on your organizational requirements. Let's begin by understanding the process flow. The user initiates this process by accessing the component definition screen, where a new record can be created. It is essential to complete all required fields. Once this information is entered, the record must be saved, which marks the completion of the setup. Before proceeding, it is important to ensure that the organization setup, input values, balance, event group, and retro component charges have already been completed. Here are the steps to follow for this process. First, navigate to the HR Management folder. Then, open the General Setup and click on Component Definition to proceed. Next, select the appropriate organization. You will then enter the component name, classification, and reporting name. After that, enter the start date, processing priority, and processing type. Mark the checkbox as true if it is required. Finally, click Save to complete the record. Now, let's switch to the system and walk through each step to understand the configuration in action. To begin the configuration, this is the login screen. The user will enter the username and password and then click on the Login button. Upon successful login, the home screen will appear, displaying some useful default widgets and charts. To access this screen, navigate to HR Management, then to General Setup, and finally to Component Definition. Click on New Record to start creating a component. Now let's go through each field one by one. For organization, you will select the organization for which you want to define this component. In Component Name, enter a clear and unique name for the component, such as Basic Salary or Sick Leave. For Component Classification, choose whether this is an earning, deduction, employer contribution, or leave information component. For Reporting Name, enter the name you want to appear in reports. Regarding the start date, specify the date from which this component will be active. The end date field is optional. You can define an end date if the component is valid only for a specific period. The processing priority field determines the order in which components are processed during payroll calculation. Components with lower priority numbers are processed first, and those with higher numbers are processed later. This processing priority becomes important in specific situations. For instance, some components depend on others, such as when a deduction is calculated based on a prior earning. For leave-related components, you may want paid leave components to be processed before leave deductions, which ensures proper value adjustment. The processing type field defines how often the component will be processed in the payroll cycle. You will select the recurring option if the component is paid or deducted on a regular basis, such as for monthly salary, HRA, or standard deductions. As an example, basic salary or PF contribution are applied in every payroll run. You will use the non-recurring option for components that are paid occasionally or one time only, such as a bonus, incentives, or reimbursement. These components are not automatically calculated every month and need to be entered when applicable. For reporting convention, you will define how this component will be reported, typically for compliance or financial reporting purposes. For currency, select the currency applicable to this component, which is usually based on the organization's default. Next, we will look at a few important checkboxes. The multiple entry allowed checkbox should be enabled if the component can be entered multiple times within a single payroll period. When DB items generated upon saving is checked, the relevant database entries will be automatically generated after saving. The Is Information Component checkbox is used for components that are informational only and are not used in calculations. If Exclude in Retro Calculation is selected, the component will be excluded from any retroactive payroll processing. In the description field, you can provide any additional notes or context for this component. Now, moving to the Additional Information section, this section includes more specific options. Select Hours or Days component, if the component is based on working hours or the number of days. Enable Overtime component, if the component represents any kind of overtime. If restrict entry in expense is checked, this component cannot be entered under employee expenses. If carried over is marked true, the annual leave component is carried forward to the next period. When carried over is selected, an additional field becomes visible, which is leave type. Here, you will select the leave type to which this annual leave carry forward component is associated, such as annual leave or medical leave. Now let's begin with creating a leave component for annual leave. Go to the Component Definition window and click on New Record. First, select the organization as star. If the component is applicable to multiple organizations, you can repeat the same steps for each. In the component name, enter annual leave. Set the reporting name as the same, annual leave. For classification, choose information, since this component is used purely for tracking leave data and not for payroll calculations. Enter the start date, for example, January 1st, 2000. You must ensure this start date is earlier than the employee's joining date. Set the processing priority as 100. A lower number indicates a higher priority. This helps ensure the leave component is processed before other components, if needed for logic or validations. Select the processing type as non-recurring, since annual leave is not processed every month. Instead, it is posted as per leave policies or specific events. The reporting convention field is not applicable, so you can leave it blank. Now, let's move on to the checkboxes. You should enable multiple entry allowed, because employees may take annual leave on multiple occasions within the same payroll period. This setting allows the system to capture more than one entry in a month. You should enable is information component, as this component is used for tracking leave data only and not for payroll calculation. You should leave exclude in retro calculation unchecked, since retro calculation is not relevant for this informational leave component. All other checkboxes, including hours or days component, overtime component, carried over, and restrict entry in expense, should remain unchecked, as they are not required for this leave component setup. Once all required fields are completed, after saving, the system will automatically mark DB item generated upon saving as true. Now, let's move to the Input Value tab to define the values associated with the annual leave component. In this section, we'll define the input value that will be used to track leave in terms of days. Organization and component type fields are auto-filled from the Header tab, so there's no need to update them manually. In the Input Value dropdown, select the value representing days, or as predefined in the system. This is because leave is generally tracked and managed based on the number of days an employee takes or is entitled to, for example, 1 day of annual leave, 2 days of casual leave, etc. In the data type, select days from the drop-down list. As already covered in the Input Value Details training video, this drop-down shows predefined input values. By default, the Generate DB item checkbox will be marked as true. Once the record is saved, the DB item generated checkbox will also be updated to true, indicating successful linkage to the database. For the leave component, there is no need to do the configuration in the remaining tabs. Your annual leave component is now successfully created and ready to be used in Leave Configuration screen. Thank you for attending.